Greetings and welcome. We are in 303 Senior English, and we now are going to turn to some introductory pages from your textbook. I hope you have your hymnal open to 234, 235. We are now going to look at the introductions to the Unit 2 history. We are working now at only level 1. We are bullet pointing as we go. Let's go ahead and begin first of all with the title of Unit 2. Do you see it on 234? Celebrating Humanity, the English Renaissance Period. Right now, go ahead and write down the word Renaissance. I want you to know how to write this word, spell this word. We will spell it regularly, so I want you to know it. Notice your dates on page 235, 1485 to 1625. Go ahead and write that down. We're going to see a quote from Shakespeare's Hamlet, "What a piece of work is a man, in form and moving, how express and admirable, in action, how like an angel, in apprehension, how like a god," to continue the quote. This coming from Shakespeare's play Hamlet, Act 2. We'll be studying Hamlet later, but for the time being, what we are going to do now is just look at Introduction to the Renaissance and the Reformation, snapshot of the period. Let's go to page 236, and all I'm asking you to do now is just read along with me, okay? Renaissance and Reformation. Again, every time you see a heading, let's make sure we're bullet pointing. Let's make sure under that heading that we are providing the important information data points. All right, here we go. Snapshot of the period, Renaissance and Reformation. Read along with me, please. Two major movements influenced the thought and literature of this period, the Renaissance and the Reformation. The Renaissance, meaning rebirth, let's write that down right now at level 1. Rebirth was characterized by innovations in art, science, and exploration, and a rediscovery of long neglected classical works. Beginning in Italy, let's write that down. The Renaissance began in Italy. It gradually spread northward. Renaissance scholars of Northern Europe, like Erasmus, let's write down Erasmus's name, attempted to reform the Catholic Church. The German theologian Martin Luther, however, initiated the movement known as the Reformation. Let's write that word down, Reformation, which led to the founding of Protestantism. Let's write that word down. We're going to come back to these words. Protestant, obviously coming from the word protest, yes? Luther stressed the Bible rather than the Pope as the source of authority and the importance of faith, rather than good works for salvation. Of the two major English works of this period, Shakespeare's plays and the King James Bible, the first is a product of the Renaissance, and the second a product of the Reformation. Let's go ahead and write this down. The Renaissance's greatest writer for our purposes in the English Renaissance is Shakespeare. If we're talking about the Reformation and we're talking about England, the most important text is the King James Version of the Bible, 1611. You'll want to write that date down. 1611, King James Version of the Bible. You have a map over on page 237. You have some examples of some Renaissance inventions there. You have some important questions at the bottom of 236, the relationship between literature and place. How does literature shape or reflect society? The relationship of the writer to tradition. All of these will be topics about which we will have something to say. Let's go ahead and turn now to 238. This is the introduction historically. Any of this information can end up on the examination, so obviously it makes sense to put it in your notes so that you can prepare for the examination. The English Renaissance period, and there you have your dates. Make sure you have those dates in your notes, 1485 to 1625. The two major European movements of this period, the Renaissance and the Reformation, both involved a return to old sources that led to cultural innovations. Let's write this down. Both the Renaissance and the Reformation involved a return to old sources that led to cultural innovations. First, the heading, Renaissance and Reformation, going back to move forward. The Renaissance, which means rebirth, sought to revive the learning of ancient Greece and Rome. Let's write that down. Revive the ancient learning of Greece and Rome. It was a secular movement that encouraged voyages of discovery and emphasized human aspiration. During this period, the very dimensions of the earth shifted and enlarged as Europeans discovered new parts of the globe, and Polish scientist Nicholas Copernicus first proposed that the sun, not the earth, was the center of the solar system. Renaissance ideas blossomed first in the Italian city-states, 1350 to 1550, and slowly spread northward, giving rise to the English Renaissance of 1485 to 1625. The Reformation, inspired by the ideas of the German theologian Martin Luther, please make sure you have Martin Luther's dates, 1483 to 1546, began in part as a reaction against what many perceived as corruption in the Catholic Church. Let's just pause for a moment and point out, because we've already done it. Obviously, we already have addressed corruption in the Catholic Church with what great writer? Chaucer, correct. Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. Especially, remember, his partner's prologue and tale, right? Reformation thinkers wanted to return to what they took to be a more pure idea of Christianity. Once again, an attempt to return to early ideas led to something new, as reformers created a denomination of Christianity known as Protestantism. The drama of English history. Next heading. England became swept up in both of these two wider European movements, sometimes in a dramatic, even bloody fashion. In the late 1400s, England was beginning to heal after 30 years of civil war. By the early 1500s, the country had plunged into the religious controversies of the Reformation. At the same time, the spirit of the Renaissance breathed new life into the arts. The story begins in 1485, when Henry Tudor, let's write that down, 1485, Henry Tudor became King Henry VII, ending a civil war and reconciling the two factions in the war, the House of York and the House of Lancaster. With him began the reign of the Tudors. Let's write that down. The reign of the Tudors begins with Henry VII. His son, Henry VIII, inherited a strong, stable country. Henry VIII married his older brother's widow, Catherine of Aragon, and she bore him a daughter, Mary. I'm at the top of 239. However, Henry then fell in love with Anne Boleyn. That's a name you definitely want to write down. A beautiful lady of the court. He also wanted a male heir, which Catherine had not provided him. He therefore petitioned the Pope for a divorce on the grounds that his marriage to his brother's widow was invalid. Henry had written a treatise attacking Luther, and the Pope had designated Henry, quote, defender of the faith, end quote, a title English monarchs retain to this day. However, when the Pope denied his petition to remarry, Henry refused to comply, marrying Anne Boleyn in 1533 and eventually severing all ties with Rome. Let's write this down. 1533, Henry VIII marries Anne Boleyn and begins the process of severing all ties with the Catholic Church. This is a monumental moment. Okay? Back to the reading again on page 239. In 1534, Henry VIII established the Protestant Church of England with himself at its head. Religious affiliation and allegiance to the king were suddenly united. The woman who was to become perhaps the greatest of England's monarchs, Elizabeth I, was born to Henry and Anne Boleyn in 1533. Before Elizabeth took the throne in 1558, let's write this down. Elizabeth will take the throne in 1558. Catholics and Protestants struggled for control of the country, and Elizabeth's ascent to the throne was marked by turmoil and death. When Elizabeth took power, however, she firmly established England as a Protestant nation and ushered in a golden age of prosperity and peace. Let's put it in our notes. We often call this time period the Elizabethan era because Queen Elizabeth was the monarch, the queen at the time. The greatest threat to her rule came in 1588. This is huge. We want to write this date down. When Catholic Spain assembled an armada, or a fleet of warships, to conquer England. Elizabeth rallied her people, and the English fleet, aided by bad weather, shattered the armada. This glorious moment produced a surge of spirit and sense of power that swept the entire nation. 1588 and the defeat of the Spanish Armada is the hallmark moment in the Elizabethan powerful era. Why? Because after 1588, England no longer has to worry about any other attacks. England has destroyed that unbelievably large Spanish Armada, that group of warships, and now England becomes paramount. They become protected in some way. Elizabeth I never married and had no heir. The final days of her reign were clouded with questions of who would succeed her. In 1603, James I became her successor, and the first of the ill-starred Stuart line. Let's write it down. 1603, James I will follow Elizabeth, and we move from the Tudors to the Stuart line. By the end of his reign, his struggles with Parliament foreshadowed the civil war that would come during the reign of his son, Charles I. Okay, so James I is followed by his son, Charles I. It's not going to be a very happy affair. Certainly not going to be the time in England that we will see with Elizabeth and her unbelievable reign. We got some key historical themes going back to create something new, and we've got 3 bullet points at the bottom of 239. Let's make sure we put this in our own notes. Renaissance scholars turned to classical authors for inspiration, and Reformation thinkers broke with the Catholic Church in their attempt to return Christianity to its original principles. The second bullet point, Renaissance ideas stimulated literary, artistic, scientific achievement in England. And the third bullet point, influenced by the Reformation, England became a Protestant country. Let's go ahead now and turn to page 240. Let's take a look at the essential questions across time, the English Renaissance period, 1485 to 1625. And notice the question, what is the relationship between literature and place? What did England come to mean? I'm reading now with you on 240. Again, follow along, taking notes as you go. This England, it was in a theater that one of the most enduring descriptions of England was delivered. In Shakespeare's play, Richard II, you want to write that down. Richard II, performed in 1595. The Duke of Lancaster, John of Gaunt, articulates his vision of what England should be. Quote, this is again Shakespeare's writing. This blessed plot, this earth, this realm, this England, end quote. His words reflect the exhilaration that followed the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588. At the time, Spain was one of the world's superpowers, feared for her military might. Spain was also a champion of the Catholic Church, which Henry VIII had rejected. By defeating the Armada, England had established its place as a player in the drama of world history. The Age of Exploration, the next heading. England also sought a place on the world stage through exploration. Fueled by the Renaissance thirst for knowledge, European navigators ventured far and wide, aided by the innovation and invention of the compass and by advances in astronomy. Their explorations culminated in Columbus's arrival in the Americas and, of course, that famous date, 1492. England's participation in the Age of Exploration began in 1497. Let's write that date down. England starts looking to go other places in the world in 1497 when the Italian-born explorer John Cabot, C-A-B-O-T, sailing for an English company, reached present-day Canada. Cabot laid the basis for future English claims in North America. This is a significant moment. 1497. John Cabot will sail across the Atlantic. He will arrive at what we today call Canada. And he will begin then the process of exploration of North America. Of course, being a student who lives and studies in America, it makes sense then to ask, what is the relationship between Cabot's first exploration and the fact that we live in a country where we speak what language? English. Let's keep going. Forging a literature of England. Even as England was redefining itself politically as a world power, its poets and dramaticists were taking a new hold on the English language, transforming it into an instrument of new literary power. The English poets Edmund Spenser, Sir Philip Sidney, and William Shakespeare pioneered new forms of the sonnet and wrote extended sonnet sequences that you will see studied on page 246. Embarking on his own journey of discovery, top of page 241, Shakespeare explored the heights and depths of the English language in his plays, rediscovering the words of philosophers and kings, as well as of rogues and laborers, and adding along the way his own coinages. Though through redefinitions of forms and new uses of English, the poets of England created a literature that was truly of England, strong enough to, in turn, influence writers across the world. By the way, notice the 3 essential vocab words on page 240 there. Exhilaration, liveliness, high spirits. Pastoral, a genre of literature portraying rural life as peaceful, simple. And climate, prevailing or average weather conditions of a place. Let's now go to 241, and let's look at the British Tradition box, The Changing English Language by Richard Ledner, and let's make a point about a man of fire new words. Time has proved the truth of what Shakespeare's contemporary Ben Jonson said of him. Quote, he was not of an age, but for all time, end quote. William Shakespeare's words, as well as his works, were not just of an age, but for all time. He was, quite simply, the greatest word maker who ever lived. I would write that down. Notice here, we're going to call Shakespeare the greatest writer who ever lived. Of the 20,138 different words that Shakespeare employs in his plays, sonnets, and other poems, his is the first known use of more than 1,700 of these words. He makes them up. He invents these words, right? Consider the following list of 30 representative words that, as far as we can tell, Shakespeare was the first to use in writing. Aerial, amazement, assassination, auspicious, baseless, and I'll let you continue to just look at this amazing list of words. The striking compound that Shakespeare fashioned to describe a character in Love, Labour's Lost is an important label for the playwright himself. A man of fire new words. Let's go to the next heading on 241. What was London's role in this literary explosion? Theater in London. Read it with me. During this period, London, a bustling port city on the river Thames, T-H-A-M-E-S, write that down, T-H-A-M-E-S, thrived, becoming a center of world commerce. As the wealth and population of the city grew, theater came to flourish there. Actors were regarded as disreputable by puritanical city officials. As a result, plays were staged in theaters outside the city limits on the south bank of the Thames. On the south bank of the Thames. That is where the famous Globe Theatre, home for Shakespeare's troupe, opened in 1599. Write it down. Shakespeare's Globe Theatre, the most famous place where he will show his plays, opens in 1599. Drama was edging London southward. As the city grew, more writers came, attracted by the presence of the theaters of patrons and of publishers. Londoners' rural dreams. Next heading. As poets and writers flocked to smoky London, soft coal was the principal source of heat. You want to write that down. That's no throwaway line. The way Londoners heated in their house was coal. And it put disgusting black smoke in the air. And it's going to be the cause of some pretty serious lung problems, tuberculosis and consumption, to just talk about one, that you're going to see bad health is associated with this terrible coal. I'm back at it reading again. They dreamed about the country. Following the models of the classical literature they had studied, they turned to the pastoral as a literary form. Pastor is the Latin word for shepherd. Greek and Roman literature had depicted shepherds and shepherdesses tending flocks in some innocent garden world. Walking the wet and stinking streets of London, poets imagined a green and carefree world, the world of English poet Christopher Marlowe's The Passionate Shepherd to His Love, a poem that we will study together. Let's go to 242. Question: how does literature shape or reflect society? Let's continue to read now. What to believe? That was the question. It was a question that affected everything from literature to politics to the very nature of the earth and the universe. The first heading. Why was belief an issue? Changing beliefs. The official religion of England changed 4 times in less than 30 years. This series of upheavals began in 1534 when King Henry VIII took England out of the Catholic camp and made it a Protestant country. The next heading. Political alliance and religious belief. The new link between politics and religion often had tragic consequences. Consider Sir Thomas More. Let's write his name down. Sir Thomas More, M-O-R-E, a trusted advisor of King Henry VIII. A man of principle, More would not support Henry's petition for divorce. After he refused to acknowledge Henry as the head of the Church of England, Henry had him executed. More's tragic end announced the new, sometimes fatal struggle between warring religious convictions. Mary the First, daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine, became queen in 1553. Let's write that down. 1553, Mary becomes the Queen of England. She denied the validity of the church her father founded and used the power of the state to return the country to Catholicism. Let's write that down. When Mary becomes queen, she returns England from Protestantism to Catholicism again. Okay? Those she thought the worst heretics she had burned at the stake, but this only fortified the resolve of those who had embraced Protestantism. As a side note, she will be called Bloody Mary because she kills so many people. Let's write that down. Mary the First will be referred to as Bloody Mary because she kills so many, what she calls heretics, Protestants who won't be Catholics. Her successor, Elizabeth I, reestablished the monarch's supremacy in the Church of England, restoring Protestantism as the country's official religion. Elizabeth strove for moderation in religious matters. Even so, she contended with Catholic plots against her throne and eventually had Mary, Queen of Scots, her Catholic cousin and rival, executed. Okay? Next heading, other shifts in belief. Even as Protestantism had shaken the Pope's claim to be at the center of the religious world, developments in science and exploration were overturning old pictures of the universe. Explorers confirmed that the earth is round, not flat. They discovered the Americas, previously unknown to Europeans, and estimates of the size of the earth doubled. Add to these discoveries the new Copernican theory that the sun, not the earth, is at the center of the solar system, and the result was the upending